Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the 9th South-South Forum on Sustainability. The theme is the collapse of modern civilization and the future of humanity. Today, we have a great pleasure to invite Javier Vargas and Kathryn Vargas from Mexico to talk about their experience with indigenous community in Chiapas. We provide English, Chinese, and Spanish simultaneous interpretation. We can find the group of interpretation at the bottom of your computer screen. We would like to thank today's interpreters, Lola Lavende, Mercedes Pico, Huang Xiaomei, and Li Monghong. Apart from Zoom webinar, we also do live streaming on Bilibili, which is a very popular social media platform in China. There are thousands of young foreigners who are interested in world politics and eager to learn from alternative thoughts and experience. May I first introduce myself as the moderator for today's session. My name is Tsui, Jade, Margaret. I am Associate Professor at the Rural Revitalization Strategy Research Institute, Southwest University, China. I am board member of Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives based in Hong Kong, China, and a founding member of Global University for Sustainability. I have been actively involved in the rural reconstruction movement in China for over 2 decades. Kathryn and Javier currently work in an organization named Educating Transform Us. They were deeply involved in the local organizing of the indigenous community in Chiapas, Mexico in the 1960s to 80s, inspired by liberation theology and working with Bishop Samuel Ruiz. They had interacted with and learned from the indigenous communities while working with them to respond to the adversities and keep nurturing hope. Actually, today's section is the 7th and also the last lecture of the series on experience with indigenous communities in Chiapas, Cosmovision, and sustainability. This series of 7 lectures, divided into 13 parts according to the Mayan cosmic vision, present Javier and Kathryn's personal trajectories, affections, reflections, and of their prime years living with the indigenous communities. The presentation always comes with powerful images and beautiful songs. Now I pass the floor to Kathryn and Javier. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a ustedes también.
Thank you indeed. Thank you so much. Good evening to all our friends in China. Good afternoon to our audience in Europe. And good morning to those of you who are joining us from our side of the world. We hope that you are all doing really well. We feel very, very happy to be back, to be here again with this wonderful audience. Since this is our final session, we assure you that we are going to miss you because we are already so used to having these exchanges with you. And it is great to have these kind of conversations, to be from one continent to the other, but if we were just side to side. The pandemic continues, and we also had our turn and our play in it. Fortunately, it was light for us, but we will continue cultivating patience, which is our best response for these difficult times and the times to come. Let's keep in our minds and in our hearts the people of Ukraine at this difficult time for them. We would also like to thank always the Global University for Sustainability from Hong Kong for opening this global space of dialogue without borders, giving us this platform so that we can expand and scale new levels of transformation consciousness. Our gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Lau Qingqi and Dr. Margaret Jade and the wonderful team of interpreters who are making our communication possible. So thank you indeed. I would also like to thank the support of our team here in Querétaro, in Mexico, our colleagues, meta coaches, communicologists Marcela Ramirez, and Salvador Cepeda, the IT technician, who always give us invaluable contributions for reflection and planning, and the technological support. So in this seventh and last session, we would like to review and to summarize our common exploration about the emergence of consciousness in the indigenous communities of Chiapas, and also our process, our endogenous and evolutionary process. We find that consciousness is linked to the rich Mayan worldview, Cosmovision, that organizes the cycles of life and nature. That's why we called it the 13 moons of the awakening of consciousness. We have presented narratives, a cosmovision, a philosophy, the images, and the shared reflection to get closer to the wisdom of the originary peoples, who, as they were truly communitarian, offer us elements of sustainable civilization models. So let's start now, as we've always done so far, by the sacred convocation of the snail. This is the voice that calls the communities in Chiapas. So let's open up today by breathing deeply to enter the sacred listening of the snail.
Empecemos ahora.
So let's start. Topic number 1 will be the hidden consciousness of the cosmic connection. Our understanding of consciousness. Consciousness is the main focus, the main reference throughout these presentations. Consciousness is the vital energy that has generated everything that has existed and that may exist in the future. Consciousness continues to break through throughout the cosmic history. According to the modern science, especially the advances in quantum physics, evolution seems to be an immense complexization of psychic energy, which, due to its different forms and throughout the deep time, becomes more aware of itself, more conscious of itself. What gives dynamism and direction to the evolution is the energy of consciousness, according to Pierre Teilhard du Chardin. And also, Julian Huxley, a contemporary of Teilhard, said that the human being is nothing else, nothing other than evolution made aware of itself. It is the point of emergence in nature where deep cosmic evolution culminates and expresses itself. From that proposal, we've tried to reflect, to understand deeper, and to share our experience and our continuous learning. So you might remember that we saw the consciousness embodied in the secrets of Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza is a wonderful testimony of a Mayan city inhabited by around 30,000 people in the 9th century. It was the seat of a civilization that was renowned because of its extraordinary knowledge, that is to say, astronomy, mathematics, architecture. Just below the central pyramid of Chichen Itza, there is a giant cenote, an underground cave with enough water to fill 6 Olympic pools, protected by a layer, like meters of layer of limestone. There are also large cenotes in the 4 cardinal points that are surrounding the pyramid. As there are not enough rivers in that part of Mexico, the cenotes were the sources of drinking water. And of course, they had a deep religious meaning with physical links to the afterlife. Chichen Itza has 13 perfectly aligned levels. It is a mathematical reflection related to astronomy and to the agricultural cycles. In addition, it served as a gigantic calendar for the city. It had 91 steps on each of the 4 sides, plus the platform above at the top, adding up to 365. That is to say, 1 step for each day of the year, formed by earth, water, and the movement of planets. The pyramid embodied the sacred beliefs and meanings of the Mayan people. The Mayan galactic codes use the numbers 13 and 20. 13 because of the 13 moons, as we said before, which last 28 days each. Nowadays, that has been proved by modern science as well. And the number 20, that represents the human being, because of the number of fingers and toes in the hands and the feet. So that gives the basis of all human fertility, animal and plant fertility as well. The Tzolk'in is one of the main calendars, and it includes this criterion of 13 and 20 as the structure of their cosmovision, and it is reflected everywhere in the construction of the Mayan pyramids themselves. The Tzolk'in, for the Mayans, is a guide for the behavior of life and relationships. So now let's move on to a song we would like to sing to you, a song that was created in the Tzetzal indigenous communities of the Lacandona jungle in 1971. We will be singing in Tzetzal language.
Matayo bichikana, ainanisha te kushleja. Matayo bichikana, ainanisha te kushleja. Yunshule kushul nanishtuke, yunsanil kushul nanishtuke, kushul, kushul, kushul.
Ya vieron ahí la traducción al español.
So over here you have the translation into Spanish. When there was nothing, there was already consciousness, because the spirit lived. Because the spirit lived, it is alive, alive, alive.
Vamos ahora al tema 2.
Let's move on to topic number 2, which is the one that we addressed as the second part of the whole. It is the cultural consciousness of the community. We're meeting with the communities in Chiapas gave us evidence that their cosmovision and their beliefs had an important ancestral depth. Hunapku is located in the center of the Tzolk'in, and it means the origin of life beyond the sun. Hunapku is the giver of movement, the giver of measure. It's a galactic nucleus. It's the purpose of the activity of all beings. So from this cosmovision, we have entered the notion of community, integrating a vision that may allow us to understand, to feel, and to respect their civilization from a Mayan perspective, not from a Western perspective. Something else that we mentioned when addressing this topic before was the Popol Vuh. Popol Vuh means the book of the community. So in addition to the Hunapku that Javier just mentioned, we also find the Popol Vuh. It is a very important reference of the Mayan cosmovision and philosophy. It talks about the achievements of a growing consciousness by contemplating the struggles, the epic events that lead to bonds of unity, always moving towards a greater concentration of transformative psychic energy. The Mayan cosmogony in the Popol Vuh tells us how the community has been built throughout a long intentional process, overcoming the difficulties and the struggles between good and evil. Its destiny is affirmed in the unity embodied by the vital connection between all beings, the sun, the stars, the moon, the earth, the planets, the water, air, fire, animals, human beings, all of that creating a community. So we can see here that the original force of the community opens up new states of consciousness. That is to say, a significant advance for evolution. So now we move on to enter the Chulel world. The pronunciation has like a stress, like an accent. It's like a ch. The ch is stronger than we would pronounce it. So the Chulel concept is a fundamental element in the Tzotzil Mayan cosmogony. And it clarifies the way of perceiving the world and perceiving yourself in the world. Chulel is vital energy. It is the spirit. It is a life-giving dynamic, indestructible, that shows itself in our bodies, in our ideas, actions, in our relations with others, in our power. Chulel is the sacred dimension of the person. Chulel is the key that integrates the being, the existence, the belongings, the bonds. It's as if it were health, illness, relation with others, authority, gender, kinship, conflicts of human beings. Let's move on now to what we said before as well about the consciousness of the word of the community. Having explored the Chulel world, of how they perceive the world and perceive themselves, it is important to see how they see their languages and how they reveal what they understand by their words, their communications, the meaning and the value of their languages form a large part of the richness of a culture, and their appreciation of the language reflects the esteem towards the community and towards themselves.
La denominan Batzil Kop, o sea, palabra verdadera. Esto significa que la persona y la comunidad se hablan y se responden dentro de sí mismos, desde su ser, buscando la coherencia entre lo que piensan, lo que dicen y lo que hacen. Y la dinámica lingüística del maya tojolabal se le llama palabra escuchada. La palabra escuchada se vuelve fecunda por la aportación, la aprobación y la empatía con la comunidad. Tojolabal, por su etimología. Entonces, retomando un poquito.
So going back, Tojolabal, because of the etymology of the word, implies the true listeners. So learning to listen integrates two attitudes. First, stop conceiving understanding the word as a property of the person who is speaking. And on the other hand, listening with the heart in order to receive the word of others and to build them within us, as Charles Lingnan says. So now let's move on to analyze a very important idea for this community, which is called Hunash Kotantik. It means in one single heart, we are together. We can see the use of the constant and important use of multiple meanings for the word heart. For their culture, the heart is the center from which you can speak, you can understand. So the common Tzetzal greeting is Bishchin Awotan, or what would mean, what does your heart say? That's what they say to one another when they meet and they greet each other in the street. What does your heart say, Kathy? My heart says that I'm happy. Today, my heart says it's happy. So the consciousness, or let's move on now to the third topic, very much related to it, the consciousness of the obedience to the mandate of the community. Because for them, the us from a community, like a community sense, that's the mandate of what they have to do. That's listening and obeying the word of the community. So for the Mayans, the relationship between the I and the we gives a strong prevalence of the we. Speaking from the we, they are uniting the relation between the I and the we, because they start from the principle that they are subjects speaking to one another, not objects. So the dialogue of subjects, of individuals, creates a we, which also implies a link that exists between the community and with all the energy of nature.
Como las comunidades indígenas, a pesar del ataque brutal del individualismo.
And it's in how indigenous communities, in spite of the brutal attack, believe strongly that all participants of the cosmos are a unity that is linked to their needs. Now, let's look at the agreement as a system of community unity. It is precisely through the social system of the agreement that communities decide. The agreement works like this. It is with reflection and participation of the community in whole. In the assembly, they look at the situations or the needs that they need to solve. They listen to them, they consider them, they take them into account, they discuss them, and in an open way, they make a decision. This decision is called agreement, the agreement. And the agreement is the guide that is going to bring consensus. And the important thing is the interaction among everybody, which produces respect, trust, and empathy. The agreement is the possession of no one, but it is strength and the value of the community. The agreement is the sine qua non factor in terms of unity and absolute trust in what is going to be done as a community. We celebrate it by sharing a chant now, which is called Community Community. It was also created in 1971 and is still, this song is still recalled and it is still sung in many communities. And we are talking about 50 years later, 50 years after its creation. And this is how the song goes.
Comunidad, cuánta alegría encuentro en ti. Mi corazón encuentra amor en mis hermanos caridad, en mis hermanos caridad. Así yo quiero comprometerme en la creación de una gran comunidad llena de fe, llena de amor para alcanzar felicidad, para alcanzar felicidad. Venimos buscando un camino nuevo para vivir mejor. Ya lo descubrimos, es único el camino, crear comunidad, crear comunidad, comunidad, comunidad. Cuánta alegría encuentro en ti, mi corazón encuentra amor en mis hermanos caridad, en mis hermanos caridad.
Ahora, vamos
Now,
a entrar a considerar
we are going to consider the fourth topic that we have mentioned before, which is the Western consciousness challenged by new paradigms. The Western civilization model has had important developments, particularly in what has to do with agribusiness technologies, communications, and transportation, and also important things such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. But tragically, it has also brought on huge destruction of ecosystems that sustain life, as well as the 2 world wars that killed 130 million human beings. So we ask ourselves, what is the direction, what are the dynamics and the destiny of this system whose technological, financial, and human investment prioritizes individualism, terrible social, economic, and political inequity, wars, and nuclear weapons. In contrast, we saw how the Mesoamerican Mayan civilizational model incorporates the whole as shared heritage of everybody and is granted as an inheritance, and not only the resources, but also the understanding, knowledge, technology, production, and consumption, as well as forms of organization in a very rich range of millenary experiences. And in relation to our life and our work in Chiapas as part of the Catholic Church, it is very useful to understand that the Second Vatican Council, completed in 1965, made a paradigm shift that really shook the church and its missionaries. As you can see in this image here, it really shook up everything. And what was it? It was a direct call to the conscience of the church, so it could return to its identity roots and its original mission, which should be of love, of service, and of commitment to justice, and to the construction of peace. So what changed for us then? The Second Vatican Council made us share much more closely the marginalized conditions that they lived in. And we realized how ignorant and how unprepared we were in order to communicate in their languages, and let alone to understand their meanings, their extent, and their lives. We understood that true endogenous Maya spirituality would flourish from its own identity and consciousness. We learned that the root of the community spirit was able to create new connections between regions and languages, and this led to much greater mutual support and unity. The diocese experienced an indigenous lay leadership, which was built from the affirmation of the we, the I in the we mentioned before, as a symbol of their belief in the importance of being in one heart, in one single heart. And now we are going to move into theme 5, which is the 5th moon, which is consciousness affirmed from the cry for the earth. Since the 1950s, some groups of indigenous peoples left their farms where they had lived in situation of slavery for generations. And it was mainly in the 60s that a massive movement took place to populate the national lands, mainly in Ocosingo towards the Lacandon jungle. About 65 or 70 villages were founded at that time with huge efforts and a lot of struggle. They were going to populate and to live where there was nothing except jungle. Because of the density of the jungle itself, they only carried the bare essentials, looking for a place to live and armed with machetes and with unshakable hope. They faced scarcity of food and lodging. They endured terrible rains, diseases, without having access to medicine, many dangerous animals and insects. And the truth is that many of them died in this attempt. Once they had settled, or the communities had begun to take shape, they also had to go through an enormous agrarian legal ordeal in order to obtain the legal right to their own land, to own the land. We accompanied some communities in this struggle. In some cases, we accompanied them in the design of the streets and the layout of their new town. Other communities, we accompanied them in their legal process to advance in the agrarian procedures amidst traps, robberies, deceit, and even death threats. The process in all communities took several years to achieve. Indeed, the struggle for land is a very difficult, very hard conquest, while at the same time very powerful. Those who conquer the land among the indigenous people are willing to give their lives to defend it. And that is how conquering and obtaining land to live on is a historic achievement, because when they have legal ownership to their land, communities are able to transcend spiritually. It gives them meaning and it gives value to their lives and to themselves. They unite with the land as a mother, as a friend and sister, and they are able to realize themselves as true Mayans through growing the land and living from and with corn. Those who left the farms and managed to overcome this condition made a kind of quantum leap from humiliation, subjugation, to being the forgers and the architects of their own freedom and their own dignity. Now we are going to finish these two themes with a chant that was created in a community called Emiliano Zapata in the Lacandon jungle. This was in 1968. And it speaks about the struggle of Zapata.
Hubo un grupo que salió, dejando sus tierras, buscando sus casas, buscando una tierra para vivir. Año del 68, presente lo tengo yo. Formamos colonia aquí en la selva, poniéndole por nombre Emiliano Zapata, poniéndole por nombre Emiliano Zapata. La salida no fue fácil, hubo mucho que aguantar. Hambre, sed, dolor y lluvia. Hubo mucho sufrimiento. Hubo mucho sufrimiento. Construimos un cayuco, una casa para todos. Empezamos nuestras milpas y la tierra a producir, y la tierra a producir. Emiliano Zapata, y Señor, es mi tierra.
Ahora vamos a considerar.
Now we are going to consider the sixth topic that we spoke about, which is consciousness challenging beliefs. In 1968, the Indigenous catechists took on the task of evaluating the work of the diocese, the leadership of Don Samuel, and the work of the missionaries. For the first time, in a very direct way, we were challenged to respond in a coherent and committed manner about how we understood God and about the messages carried by our words and actions, which affected the lives of many communities. The evaluators were Indigenous brothers who had not received any type of formal education. They didn't speak Spanish, and they brought with them a spiritual culture of listening, of observation, and also of reflection, which they processed as a community, and they created agreements and communicated the results. Their evaluation consisted of generating 3 questions that led us to reflect. With the first question, they wanted to know if God saves only souls, or does he also save bodies? The second question was to know if those seeds of the word belonged only to priests, or if they could be found and grown and cultivated in their own communities. And the third question was, how long do you want us to call you brothers? This means that they deeply questioned the commitment of the missionaries. In 1968, this evaluation with Don Samuel present in San Cristobal showed us the need for conversion. And that night, Don Samuel publicly proclaimed his own need for conversion. And he recognized that the church was being challenged to find God in history, in culture, and in the experience of sharing struggles and suffering of communities. It meant recognizing that the seeds of salvation were in the community itself, in the word of the community, in the millenary values that sustained it. And thus, we also knew that we were required to pledge our own lives as a sign of an effort to evangelize from the heart with a faithful, active, and helpful presence in the community. And as a result, we made the commitment to engage even more in linguistic, cultural, and artistic understanding. The seventh topic was consciousness recreating identity. In October 1969, an assembly of catechists in Ocosingo redefined their role and strengthened their identity. Someone asked, how do we know what really helps the community? And someone answered, well, we are the sowers. And the first and most important task is to be Tobel Tekoptik. This is to be those who harvest the word of the community. And in order to harvest the word of the community, we need to listen very, very carefully. With the new consciousness, catechists took ownership of their own identity because they created the meanings themselves. The second function that they affirmed was Snael te lekilkop, which is to keep and to reflect the word of the community in their hearts. And the third function which they identified was skasesel telekik kop, which is to re-sow and to proclaim the word, united with their traditions and their wisdom of the gospel and the scriptures. However, catechists had observed attitudes that were somewhat passive in the communities, where they listened but without participating very much. And they decided that they had to act, and they discovered their function, which was tihua negetik, which means being responsible for the awakening and for shaking up the thoughts and the hearts of the community in the service of the community itself. So the elements of their new identity as spiritual and pedagogical guides corresponded to their Mayan identity, Mayan agricultural identity, people that have always been linked to the rhythms and the vibrations of nature, sowing, observing, and caring for the earth, harvesting, contemplating, and joining or uniting with the energies of the earth and the cosmos. And these two topics now, after these two topics, we are going to sing another song that was created in this assembly of catechists and turuneles in the community of Tani Perlas in the Lacandon jungle as a result of the reflection that was being done to express the discovery of their culture.
So now let's move on to topic number 8, consciousness seeking freedom. What day, what moon, what year is what is told here did take place? Like in dreams, like in nightmares, everything is simultaneous. Everything is present and everything exists today. These are the words of Rosario Castellanos. We recall here a true anecdote of the two missionaries lost in the jungle, who found themselves in a typical farm in 1970. It was the Chactajal farm, where Rosario Castellanos, the famous author from Chiapas, spent large part of her childhood, and it described in her work Baluncanan. Spending the night at the farm, the missionaries saw firsthand what indigenous slavery was like: racism, economic injustice, inequality, and the contempt for women because of the established gender roles. A true local hell. The conversation after Chactajal sought ideas about the spirit and the dynamics that could guide a new stage of their work with the communities. That's when the connection appeared, that is to say, relating the Jews that were slaves in Egypt experiencing an oppression that was similar or worse to Chactajal, but they managed to come to terms with their own history and escape from slavery. Despite the doubts and the difficulties, the exodus required their decision to launch into an uncertain future, armed only with their unwavering hope of living in freedom in the promised land. That's why we started developing what we call the catechesis of the Exodus. The pastoral work had to give priority to the word of the community, so that their cosmovision and their traditions, myths, and rites would come up, linked to the gospel as a reference to the Christian message and to the sacramental life. It was essential to gather the experience of their own exodus that was taking place precisely during those years. The point was to try and express their postponed desires, listening to their own voice, their spirit, from their immense inner world, thus translating that inner world into actions, actions of personal, community, and society transformation. So which was the methodology?
Escuchar.
The methodology was to listen and to be listened. That was the main substance of the Word of God. And the paths that allowed for that were, first, the generating question. So it asked the community to say what they thought, what they believed in, what they felt. Second, community dialogue. This linked their words, moving freely, creating consensus, agreements, building the community thinking and community beliefs. And number three, the synthesis of the word. It gathered the diversity, it created confidence, security, a sense of accomplishment. It integrated the word, the reflection, the music, the prayers, the candles. It gave a reason for celebration. So over here, we can see the way in which the community was organized and connected. The organizational base was each community first. Second level was the zone or the area. It was created by a group of 5 to 8 communities, organized according to their orography, that is to say, who were their closest neighbors. Third level, the region. Each region had several zones or areas. It could be up to from 4 to 6 zones. The role of the regions was to convene and to coordinate all the catechists. The general coordination was responsible for the inter-regional connectivity. So the contents of the plan for these catechesis of Exodus. We are looking for freedom, that was the name. The need was to respond to the deep and common longings of the community. They needed a great spiritual and transcendent sense and at the same time that it would be practical and transforming for daily use, for the daily community life.
La pena acumulados
The accumulated pain and grief were great, were large, and they left their mark on lives for generations. The proposal in the structure of the lessons had a theological and pastoral content in order to project faith, hope, and love, known in the Catholic tradition as the theological virtues. So the catechesis of Exodus, we are looking for freedom, as you can see here in the image. That's a book. The image is from a book that was created with the community. It includes 50 lessons, and the drafting, the elaboration process took almost 2 years. The content was developed in several sections that were connected according to the consciousness that awakened in the communities. So the catechesis of Exodus is organized in 3 main sections. The one that what you've seen here, this is the original book. It's not a picture, it's not a copy, it's the original book of the catechesis that we created with the communities. And we didn't say this before, but as a matter of fact, that book was created in Celtal language first, and then it was translated into Spanish. So everything we are showing here existed in Tzetzal first, and then, for the sake of the non-Tzetzal communities, it was translated into Spanish. So let's move on. Number 1, what God wants for us. So the first 5 lessons talk about God's plan, God as the creator who put the cosmos into action out of love, so that life could develop for the benefit of everyone. So it includes the responsibility of respecting the creation, taking care of it, and working jointly, and also exploring what we want as human beings. As they realized that, they actually realized that we live in oppression. So that's why the second part, how we live in oppression, they include 20 lessons that include all the experiences lived in terms of situations of exploitation, racism, lies, dispossession that were contrary to God's plan. So they experienced the oppression in different areas, in the economic fields, political, cultural, and religious areas. Part number 3 is we live with faith, hope, and love. The total amount are 50 lessons. So this last part includes 25 lessons focused on acting from faith, as understood evangelically from their own Mayan roots and beliefs, valuing their efforts in life and in history. Hope was also approached from an ancestral experience or point of view, and the solidarity practices that gave a reason to that hope. So how were these lessons built or drafted? For the communities, teaching was an endogenous movement, since they provided the essence, the content, that is to say, their word, their thoughts, their feelings, their doings, their actions. The preparation of these lessons included the participation of many people with different talents. The regional coordinators, for example, made a summary of all the regions, all the zones, all the communities. Next to them, there were the wise men, the wise elders. They didn't know how to write or how to read, but they had wisdom. So they dictated the content, inspired by the attentive listening to the previous reports. The musicians created a song as the ones that we've sung so far in all the previous meetings and sessions. And that's when these kind of songs emerged. There were another group that was the scribes. The scribes wrote down, they noted down what the elders said. And then there were other people making copies of that text. That text was later on distributed to the community, thus following the whole process built among the 200 communities. So, topic number 9, the consciousness of the collective and public exercise of rights. We have to mention here the Indigenous Congress that was held in 1974 in San Cristóbal de las Casas. In this context, we could say that the motto or the slogan of this Congress was equality in justice. That was the clamor of everyone. That was what they aspired to. After having lived for centuries with injustice and with oppression. So a very important objective of this Congress was to position and to keep indigenous peoples as the protagonists at all times, focusing on their words, their language, their art, their music, their agreements and their decisions. So for the first time in history, they wanted to reach an inter-ethnic unity in dialogue with the world, so showing themselves with dignity as a benchmark for the new relations based on justice and equality. They also sought to include the more isolated communities, that is to say, the ones that lacked almost all communication routes or transportation routes, so as to show the experiences of marginalization and exploitation they lived in. Then the Indigenous coordination focused on discussing and agreeing the topics that would be addressed. So how to prepare them, how to present them, trying to find harmony and balance while seeking freedom of expression, both from a linguistic point of view, cultural point of view, and personal point of view. So the topics addressed in the Congress were land, trade, education, health. So all of them responded to their essential needs. The support teams were important, facilitating lateral tasks, which included the communities themselves, the pastoral teams, together with other professional friends, volunteers, national and international agencies that supported them with financial resources. They had to organize the meals, the accommodation, the venues for the local and regional meetings, so that they could hold 20 sub-congress meetings, as well as the final General Congress for 1,500 representatives that arrived in San Cristóbal. In order to facilitate communication between the different ethnic groups, there was a team of translators, simultaneous interpreters with 5 linguistic channels, so that the communication could circulate and could flow in real time. Other tasks were secretarial tasks, talking to the press, keeping the documents, and dealing with health issues, clothing issues, because many people came from tropical areas and they were arriving at the cold mountains of San Cristóbal. An important decision was that the microphone was always in the center, in the middle of the event, where the coordination team was there, so as to allow for the delegates to take the floor. The single voice that was not speaking in an indigenous languages was a brief speech by Manuel Velasco Suarez, the governor, the state governor at the time. It was possible to film this Congress, as we showed last time with the film, because we got in touch with Rogelio Cuellar, a young journalist and a photographer with great social sensitivity, who was working in a magazine called Proceso. His images carefully captured the feet, the faces of the people, the delegates, the women, the children. He captured the sky, the clouds, the mountains, the corn. So he was like, his eye was very sharp. 300,000 people participated in this Congress, with 1,500 representatives elected by the communities. They held 20 sub-congresses and the main Congress in San Cristobal. It implied approximately 600,000 kilometers walked on foot between valleys and mountains. So the contribution in terms of hours invested for the Congress was approximately 45,000 hours. So this shows that the Indigenous Congress represented or had an immense value, historical value for all of them. All the members invested not time or money, they invested their own lives as an offering, as a collective hope for a new dawn of freedom and rights, as they said, of equality and justice, after 500 years of subjugation. So let's listen to the words of Andrés Aubry now. His word, I mean, he was an anthropologist and a sociologist from France, and he expressed this in a newspaper article.
Okay.
Can we play it, or it's not working? Oh, it's not. No, it doesn't matter. I can read it. I can read it. He said, 1974 is a year that was marked by a new destination for the indigenous consciousness. It is no longer the PRI and the INI communities. It became the promise of a new alternative society. It happened that the Congress stole the note from oil, from hydroelectric dams, and it focused on the organization of the indigenous peoples from the jungle, the Chamules, something unprecedented. Never before the indigenous peoples had enjoyed so much media coverage. Chiapas became the goal of a new destination. Many people started analyzing all that their social current times were showing. Everything started from that Congress. Even Zapatism started there. The eldest ones, talking about the final event, they said, that's where our consciousness was born.
El Congreso Indígena también tuvo
The Indigenous Congress also had a very important contribution, which was expressed in these words by Jorge Santiago. He also cooperated with the San Cristobal diocese, and he's the author of La Pasión de Servir al Pueblo, the name of his book that includes interviews with Don Samuel. He said the Indigenous Congress of 1974 is the root of many movements in the communities that still continue. It gave us the strength to fight for Mother Earth and to build solutions to the problems that we live. After the Congress, there was an awakening in all the communities. So we learned what it implied to organize ourselves, what it means to participate. It was a great experience that marked us all, looking for solutions, growing in our thoughts, giving time to dialogue and to the meetings with others. This allowed us to become organized people. Because of this organizational capacity, we can now look for solutions. We have a long history of solutions being sought. We've advanced in solving our needs. So from all of this, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation was born. It was born as another way of saying, okay, that's enough. After 1994, it continues because it continues to seek to build a society with their own strength, their own autonomy, their own decision power. The spirit that was born in the Congress still remains.
Now we are going to sing for you the hymn of the conference. That was done in the 4 main languages, but we're going to sing it in Celtal. Celtal is sang it in Celtal, the Tzotzil sang it in Tzotzil, the Tojolabal sang it in Chojolabal, and the Chol in Chol.
Celtal, Tzotzil, Tojolabal, Chol, Kunash, Kotan, Yashvenoti, Kunash, Kotan, Yashkoloti, Sok, Taspi, Silva, Lumilal, Sok, Taspi, Silva, Manota, Celtal, Tzotzil, Tojolabal, Chol, Kutan, Tzotzil, Tojolabal, Chol, Kunash, Kotan, Yashvenoti, Kunash, Kotan, Yashkoloti, Sok, Taspi, Silva, Manota, Sok, Taspi, Silva, Lumilal.
Seguimos con el tema 10.
We will continue now with the topic 10, the consciousness of our united force for the common good. Now we will talk about the birth of the Kiptik Talekubetzel. On December 14th, in 1975, the organization called Inteltal Kiptik Talekubetzel was born. This event took place in the San Juan locality in the Cañada, the Patiwitz Canyon, At the same time, 35 towns from Ocosingo joined the organization, and a few months later, another 16 communities joined. Why this name? This name means our strength for good living, and it reflects a community sense of the shared struggle to achieve a dignified life in accordance with everything that was declared and demanded in the Indigenous Congress: equality, injustice. When the members of the organization were asked why they chose this name, they said, to be Kiptik Talekubetzel is to honor ourselves and thus follow the path as Celtal Mayans, because it points us, it shows us the way to work and gives us the direction of our destiny. And now we are going to go into the thought of the Kiptik Talekubetzel. This thought tells us that without good, fair, and correct work, an organization cannot move forward, even if it has good structures and an organic life. The ideas that destroy us are these: what produces wealth is money, and the ideas of the indigenous say that what produces wealth is
Tengo dinero
labor. I have money because I am smart is opposed and destroyed. You have money because you exploit us, is what the indigenous said. They used to say that destructive ideas said that what was individual was best, and the indigenous, and that the government should be by those who study, and power is the basis or the foundation. And they, in contrast, said that community is best, that government should be the government of the people, and that human rights are actually the foundation of power. The reunification of the Ariks, for reasons of impositions from the government and the advisors of the government, they imposed on peasant organization in Mexico many things that caused them to separate, and they generated a lot of damage until they were able to get together again. And when they got together again after 10 years, they said something very powerful to themselves: we are in just one single heart. In order to reach this point, according to their customs and their preparation, they did Celtal Maya reconciliation, which consisted of showing that mutual forgiveness, reconciliation, and determining the key points of a new agreement was important to know how to administrate themselves. They looked for unity and common good, unity, action, and common good and well-being. Of course, this event was followed by a big party with food, music, and dance. Bernardo Toro says, a feature of the most important goods in life is that they are not accumulable. Love, trust, loyalty, ethics, fidelity are not cumulative. They are goods that can only exist as long as they are produced. The same is true of democracy. It is not a cumulative good. Democracy is like love. It cannot be imitated. It cannot be imposed. It cannot be stated by decree. It cannot be bought. It can only be lived if it is constructed every day. Democracy is not a science. It is not a political party. It is not a religion. It is not a social movement. Democracy is a way of seeing and a way of building the world. It is a way of living and being in the world. In short, it is a worldview. So now we move into the 11th moon, which said consciousness of new paradigms in the face of today's challenges. A challenge is defined as something that is difficult to solve. We discovered that the current challenges in Chiapas today, they are real, but they are not only limited to this region, nor to that population. They are global challenges that currently concern us all. In Chiapas, the most pressing current challenges are ecological destruction, gender inequality, migration, cultural and value disruptions, as well as drug trafficking and armed violence. It is important to remember that our universe itself is not a stranger to chaos and destruction. Rather, that these are part of the history of the cosmos. Chaos surrounds us and abounds, and chaos and apparent violence in nature, such as volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, fires, etc., not only produce extinctions and destruction, but they are also necessary for the emergence of a new creative order. They're necessary to achieve evolutionary leaps. Within the old paradigm, chaos was considered bad, but it is really something that must lead us to change the way we relate to it. The true challenge is to accept and to realize that chaos is normative, because through destruction itself, life is redesigned. If we learn to embrace chaos instead of rejecting it as something evil, we will find that the spell can be broken. It means that the universe itself has the power to transform and to heal itself, as well as ourselves, because we are part of it. Evil. We find also that among human beings there is evil. We see that evil arises in the dysfunctionality of personal life, in the excess of accumulation, in idolatry of the individual, in the domination of one gender over the other, in the exclusion of women and exploitation of their bodies and their work, denying them their human rights. Also in the domination and irrational excessive exploitation of the earth itself. This is systemic violence against life itself, and it leads to murder and wars. This is why the emergence of a united human consciousness is so vital, is so important, and necessary for human survival and for the survival of life-sustaining ecosystems. The last topic that we presented had to do with the unity of consciousness in the whole. Faced with the current crisis, it is necessary to rethink actions and initiatives and to reform thinking itself. To quote, Luis Lopez Llera, the negative virus of the COVID-19 pandemic is Gaia's solution against the brutally destructive behaviors of Homo sapiens. It must be overcome by a positive virus that can overcome the destructive mistakes that we repeat over and over again. This is why it is imperative to say no to the power summits, the dominance and dependency system, to gender inequality, to populist revolutions, to the burning of fossil fuels, to wars, to violence, to selfish and manipulative forms of absolutism. This is why the unitive consciousness says yes, it inspires and drives us to rethink how we can create civilizational paradigms that can protect, reinforce, and share life. We need to say yes to the paradigm of care. Care today is not an option. Either we learn to care or we are all going to perish, says Bernardo Toro. When we love, we care. When we care, we love. Care is the central category of the new paradigm of civilization that is trying to emerge throughout the universe. Care takes on a double role of prevention of future damage and of regeneration of past damage. Restructuring towards sharing and solidarity economies, the re-existence of energies, spaces, and times that appreciate identity, which is the I in the we. Security, being able to foresee rather than to attack, and sustainability, not so much of money, but of exchange of goods for life. Good, and the construction of good, true, and beautiful relationships that can bring ethics to society and the world. In all this process of looking into the consciousness that advanced and developed in the indigenous peoples, we also saw a development of our own consciousness. Given that consciousness is always expanding, we recognize great shifts of consciousness in ourselves. This has been primarily because of the experience with indigenous communities and new opportunities and areas of exploration and learning. The main areas to us in the last 20 years have been the social articulation of shared knowledge, spirituality, and neurosemantics and neuro-linguistic programming. In the articulation of shared knowledge, we find the experience of working with different initiatives from various civil society organizations, which have given us a lot of richness. Just expanding, multiplying, and enhancing resources of all kinds is the only requirement of knowing how to appreciate, use, and recreate what is being given and received. Throughout our history, we have been able to be part of important social movements for society, such as the Indigenous Congress, the creation of institutions at national and international levels, and we have been able to unite. We have created Educate Us transforms us, and we are tonight transforming ourselves and sharing with the world through the Global University of Hong Kong. The second important area in our evolutionary process is spirituality that has marked our lives. To us, spirituality is the inner life force that can guide the development of our consciousness towards attaining unitive wholeness. This is exemplified through our work with the indigenous peoples in Chiapas. And we have also had the opportunity to share spirituality in other environments, in other countries and other cultures, living experiences that have been vitally important and transcendental. For example, in this image, you can see that I am there, and next to me is the daughter of Nelson Mandela, the previous one. Yes. We have Nelson Mandela's daughter, and then we have the president of Cinepolis Foundation. And then we have Kathy, and we have the person who was the director of Twitter. The study and the practice of neurosemantics have given us professionalism, tools, and skills to work as meta coaches. We have facilitated changes and transformations in individuals, in groups, and in organizations for their empowerment and self-realization. We sought common good, abundance, and happiness. We founded in 2007, along with other colleagues, Educar nos transforma. Educating transforms us. And we have created different programs, among them a system called Bullying Tickles Me, in order to eradicate violence and bullying in schools. This program has just won, last May, the first place at the NLP Awards 2022 in London, in the category of education and research. This is a significant contribution for new models of civilization that are empathetic and supporting, and that already spread in South America, in South Africa and other countries. Now, we are going to look at what we have been creating throughout our presentation, which is the diamond of consciousness. Throughout our presentations, we have sought to explore the development of consciousness as the advancing process that seems to orient the entire universe towards greater degrees of conscious, intelligent, and self-reflective life. The evolution of consciousness is, in short, the evolution of the cosmos. And as we can see here in this intention, we see a symbolic reference that refers to the links between the whole in unity. Now we're going to speak of this consciousness of unity in the whole, and now we are going to speak about our consciousness in dialogue.
Las conciencias dialogando.
Okay, so the consciousness in dialogue. Consciousness empowers us and calls us to influence, to have an influence throughout our significant exchanges, our thoughts, our attitudes, and our actions, seeking a new vital and viable civilization. Be convinced of the power of our personal consciousness and associated consciousness. So let's imagine, who would we become if we act from this vital perspective and from that force of united consciousness? What should we be doing in order to put our consciousness into action? My friends, brothers and sisters from China and from the rest of the world, let's talk now. Let's do it by means of questions that you may have, or any contributions that you may want to make and that will enrich us all, and will give us the possibility to build towards the future, so that that can create new civilizing models for the future. So welcome any questions now.
Thank you very much, Kathy and Javier. And I would like to invite some friends in the panel, Claudia, Monica, and Mayu. Please raise your questions or give your comments. After that, we will collect some questions from Chinese audience. So I would like to invite Claudia to speak first.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos
días. Hello everyone. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here in this meeting, this session. Such a pleasure to be listening to Kathy and Javier, as always. It was very touching, very moving, very rich. Not only the information that they present, but also their experience, the feeling they show, the emotions they convey. A lot of the ideas you've shared are still in my mind. And one of the things that you mentioned today, well, it's been on my mind for a long time, but you mentioned that today as well, to emphasize that the indigenous communities are in very diverse territories, very diverse lands. This is essential not only because it implies understanding that they've managed to keep those territories, to maintain those territories. I was reading a lot of studies that talk about that, but one study in particular said that where the indigenous communities are located, the territories have 91% of biodiversity conservation. Nowadays, facing the climate change, the climate collapse, I should say, it is essential that we might learn from this other paradigm that you are showing and sharing with us. How much we need to learn and to be humble in order to acknowledge, protect those originary communities and peoples. And not only that, we also need to move away from this individualization paradigm, exploitation paradigm, moving to another paradigm where they, for example, can teach us a different way of understanding the world. Something else that I would like to mention, because you were also talking about the Vatican, and I think it is important to mention as well what happened when Pope Francis reached the church. That was an important change, you know, because he created a new document where he mentioned the care of nature, the care of Mother Earth. And that was a change in the paradigm as well, in the paradigm of the church. And I've just read a book by Franco Berardi, where he also explores this change between Benedict and Pope Francis. He said that Pope Benedict, he was the Pope of truth, a philosopher who wanted to continue with this paradigm that there is a single truth, which is the truth of God, the truth of the church. And that was the base for the rest of the faith of all Christians. And he mentions how Pope Benedict had a kind of crisis that even made him resign to being Pope, and how a new Pope emerged, saying that what we need nowadays is not the truth, that faith doesn't need to be based on a single truth, but on quality. Quality is what you've just mentioning. Charity, the quality of charity, friendship, kingship, being able to perceive and to understand others. So the new paradigm is care and friendship. So I think that now many of those, well, those of us who are here facing these huge institutions as the churches, I hope that now what prevails there as well is friendship and care, and this new paradigm of analyzing things as a whole that will lead us to having a different mankind, which is so urgent in our current conditions and situation. So thank you again, Katy and Javier, for reminding us all about all of this in such an artistic way, in such a beautiful way. I really appreciate that all the sessions are recorded, because I would really like to share them with the rest of my colleagues. So thank you indeed. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Claudia. And our next discussion will be Monica. Could you turn on your camera? Yes.
Okay, pues bueno, muy buenos días a todos.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Your mic, but can you hear me? Yes, Monica, now we can hear you. Okay, good morning. It's such a pleasure for me to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. It's always a delight to listen to you, Katy and Javier, and you also enrich and expand my awareness, my consciousness. With these talks and with this experience that you shared with this beautiful Mexican community, we can see that throughout your history, you appreciate listening a lot, community, communication, and the common good. So connecting to this idea of moving away from individualism, which is something that is all over us, and it is very damaging for us, for the planet. So by means of communication, leaving that behind, by means of listening, valuing the word, and creating a larger common good. Those are the learnings that I take from your session, from your experience, creating a better community with social actions that actually we are all committed to that. So I'm going to help you to develop this new way, not new as a matter of fact, but new for us, this new way of understanding communication and community. Thank you, Monica. Thanks for that comment.
Thank you. And we also have friends, Mayo and Juan. Hello.
Hola.
Yeah. Hola, hola.
Hola, buenos días.
Buenos
Hello,
dias.
good morning. Good morning. Can you hear us? Yes, okay. I think the mic is working, right? Is it? Yes. Okay, it's been a real pleasure to have participated in these kind of communities, in these groups. I mean, we've been following the presentations by Kathy and Javier, and they represent the path of many people. This is something that gives us so much joy, you know, seeing the achievements, the successful achievement of how they managed to gather all their experiences to be saved so that the future generations might learn from that as well. In the chat box here, there was someone asking something like, the question was in English, so I couldn't understand it fully, honestly, but I think they were asking for the relation with the good living or the well-being. And I would like to answer, at least from my point of view, everything that Javier and Kathy have presented so far is the well-being, the good living of the indigenous peoples. It's the way in which they decided to call the consciousness of their own lives, of their own lifestyles in relation with nature. So it's not that this concept emerged from there. I mean, it's a concept that existed for many centuries, and many native peoples, not only from Latin America, but from all over the world, they've known this for centuries. So I just wanted to add this. And I would like to make one further comment. The missionaries who went to live to Chiapas with Don Samuel as their leader, what they did was to listen to the indigenous people, listen to their pain, listen to the wealth of their culture, listen to the questions, you know, the questions that they posed, the questions to the church. And imagine if they had been politicians or people of power, they would have said, like, how are you questioning the church? How come? But they did listen, and they answered with love, saying, we want to support you. And it's not only for a couple of years. We would like to support you always, forever. So Don Samuel, as a leader, managed to gather many people, to make a lot of valuable people come together with huge hearts and huge ears to be able to listen and to understand. So it's not only a question of listening. They allowed themselves to be questioned, and that moved them in their hearts. All of that created a change that was the acknowledgement for the lives that indigenous peoples were living. That's what strengthened them a lot, seeing that there was a true commitment with them and for their benefit, not only not only for others, you know, because indigenous peoples were always treated as inferior, as a lower class, and they still are. Together, they learned how to analyze the reality differently. They could no longer see their reality as, I don't know, a doomed destination. No, they understood, and that gave them hope for the future. The indigenous people, I mean, they were condemned, they were doomed to continue living as slaves, to be always inferior, to live with pain, with sorrow. And this opened up their eyes, and they said, wait, no, we can change our lives. And the Indigenous Congress was, I mean, it was not only that, as Javier and Katy explained before, in 1974 when the Congress was held, but it started years before, and it continues years afterwards. That is to say, what I mean is the whole reflection of all of this and how they needed to organize themselves. So yes, I think this is the part of history that I think is the most beautiful part in this relation between mestizos, like the indigenous peoples, and the mestizos. And we need to say that because we are divided as a population in these different ethnic groups, but we need to remember that at the same time that all of this was happening, there were other forces, negative forces, that had an impact on the indigenous peoples, and they were leading negative plans. So you have, for example, on the one hand, the government officials, and they wanted to continue ruling over the indigenous communities' lives. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't listen to the indigenous peoples. I mean, the government decided a plan, imposed it on them, and they said, I don't know, we have to integrate these communities and, I don't know, just assimilate them to us, kind of make them resemble us more. It's a long story. I cannot talk about that now, I know, but let's not forget that these wonderful stories that Katy and Javier have been telling us, this was part of a world that was posing a lot of challenges for the communities, and the landowners, I mean, of lands that were empty, they managed, I mean, the communities, they managed to make farms, but the indigenous peoples became slaves in those farms. So this was not simple. It was not a simple struggle. This was a struggle going against the current. And of course, the current of the landowners was stronger. And it's still on. We still have that same problem. So the work started back then. There were not so many people outside from this community. Or let's put it like this. There were not so many people coming to Chiapas from other places. Now, there are many more forces, many more people, and the nature, which is the greatest richness and wealth of this planet, is there as well. And as Claudia said as well, the most diverse and biodiverse regions are those ones, the lands where the indigenous communities have lived and worked for centuries. So this is an ongoing struggle. It's terrible. And what is happening currently in the indigenous communities is regrettable. It's very sad because the population has grown very rapidly, much more rapidly than the mestizo population. So they needed more resources, more land, and they have been denied all of that. So now this is something that we need to study with a different perspective. Many have lost this beautiful legacy, but this will go on. This will go on.
Thank you very much. We have other people who also want to comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Juan, could you also like to speak? Yeah.
Nada más quisiera hacer un breve comentario.
No, I just wanted to say something about how in the creation of consciousness, of awareness, there is a space for pain, for the pain that accompanies this work. And that leads us not only to see, but to also feel with the people. I'm only going to recall a fact. This is the first time that I mention this in public, because it is a very painful memory, very difficult memory for me. And now, but already the two main protagonists have died, have passed. A while after the Zapatista uprising, when immediately after those first combats, they were taking trucks full of injured people, people who were dying, to Tuxtla. Some of us were burned. We were burned alive in the military zone. And there was a testimony of some people who mentioned this, who said this to Don Samuel, and he immediately passed on this message to the peace commissioner from the government, who was Licenciado Manuel Camacho. So I was the spokesperson of those horrible news. But the pain of knowing what was happening, the pain of Don Samuel when he said, "Don't tell this to anybody, take it directly, tell Marcelo and tell the major in charge of security that you only can speak to Camacho." And Camacho, his face when he learned that he had to intervene in an assembly, and how he is able to overcome everything, saying this is a difficult moment, but this will be solved. This will be solved. So I believe that the pain of our people, the pain of a lot of people, also plays a role. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Kathy and Javier may respond this round of questions.
A lo mejor te contestan a ti algo, pero bueno.
Bueno, yo creo que no es tanto responder.
I believe that it's not so much about responding, but about admiring and thanking the knowledge and the experience and the wise words of our comrades who have just intervened. Jade and Monica, they have been there for many years. Of course, it is true that listening to the word, this is key. Of course, also the territory taken over by the owned by the communities themselves is much better, because it gives it meaning. And the words of the Pope, of course, they are in sync with what life requires. What Maju said in relation to the different aspects of approaching the understanding of life, which was both the part that had to do with the community, understanding pain, approaching how they live, etc. Manu has really given us a taste of everything that this life, indigenous life, means, which transcends to other people. This is very rich, very rich. And what Juan just told us, only a person like Juan, only Juan could have told us about this in this world, because he was in charge by Don Samuel. He was placed in charge by Don Samuel to give this news. And so thank you very much for telling this story here in this forum that says so much about the inner secrets of the struggle, the pain, the sorrows of so many people. So this is a very beautiful round of people who speak from their experience, their life experience, and the testimony of their own lives. Thank you very much.
We also do the live streaming on Bilibili, and now we have over 1,700 viewers on this platform. And our colleagues, Jin Peiyun, she is collecting some questions from Chinese audience. So I will ask Peiyun to read the questions in Chinese, and please choose the English interpretation to listen to the questions one by one.
Would like to thank both speakers. There are 3 questions from Chinese audiences. Number 1 is, please explain this area I is a we, this concept. This ethics was brought into being in the 1960s. After all these decades, does this continue to exist? Please explain how this ethics is being practiced in their daily life. Question number 2, Caracal of Zapatista. Is this derived from the organization of indigenous tribes as promoted by the liberation theology in the 1960s? What are the similarities and differences between these 2 kind of organizations? Since the 1960s, does the life situation and self-identification of the indigenous people overcome immense changes? What are their biggest problems or challenges the indigenous people are facing today?
Okay, so we will do this round of questions because we also want to close in the final part all these interventions together. So now we are going to comment on these 4 questions to understand the I in the we. Of course, we can do that. The I think, comes from the Mayan worldview. Einstein said something once. We have an illusion or a cognitive deception that wants to set us apart as human beings, as if we were different from nature. And that is not what native peoples live and understand. We can speak of the native peoples from Chiapas, but I'm sure that in China and Africa, many native peoples have an understanding of unity that is much more intimate with nature because they live closer to nature. They live in rural areas. They live in much more unity with the natural events, with the rains and with the different moments. So the I is an I that is considered as part of a whole, part of an everything, part of nature, but also part of the whole with the community with which they live, their families, their relatives, their local organization for production, for harvest. They work together in everything they do. When there is a need, the community sees how they're going to respond as a whole. And we know, for example, in Oaxaca, they have the tequio. Tequio is, for example, if they have to fix a road, we all have to contribute to this work. We're going to set a certain day for working on this. These are decisions because everybody feels part of a whole. And I is not considered as an individual entity, an individual being. This is how they understand themselves, as part of a whole, as part of a community and part of nature also. I hope a bit the question in relation to this. This is what we have been trying to talk about. It's great what you just mentioned, Kathy, because you relate this understanding, this cosmic understanding, scientific understanding from Einstein with the indigenous tradition, which is also scientific, but it is not preached like this. They live it in a different way. Einstein said that we had to liberate ourselves from this prison, from this wrongful way of thinking. I'm sorry, no, you don't have to apologize. It's great. So the I in the we is that when I speak, I am included in the we, because the other one, that other person that is listening to me, is part of me, and I am part of the other person. That is why it is so relevant. It's the I within the we. Number two, how do these way of living continue to exist in daily life? Would you like to mention this? No, you go ahead. In daily life, in communities, because this is related also to the last question, which asks about what has changed. Well, things that are changing in Chiapas, as well as in other parts of the world, is that electronic life, new life, has entered communities, of course, and this also brings about important changes. Another important change is that a lot of people migrate, and when they come back, they bring new customs, new ways of doing, and migration many times has to do with economic decisions, which also modify local economies. Local economies are not the same as before. Before they were 100% pure local. Now there's a lot of foreign, there's a lot of people waiting for money to be sent from their relatives into the community. So there is traditional life that continues, the community way of life continues in homes, and the celebrations, the river harvests, of course, all of this continues, but there are big changes that are taking place, and we are sure that the new generation of young people are living a new era, which is not the same as the era that we lived and we participated in. There is a challenge there, a challenge for new civilization paths. And in relation to the third question, could you repeat the question, Kathy? What is the situation of participation? They asked about the current challenges. I feel that we tried to show that the current challenges do not only pertain to Chiapas, they are challenges that the world faces. And this is why we wanted to mention a challenge also to the community that is here gathered tonight, participated in these sessions. We talked about the destruction of ecosystems. We talked about gender inequality. We talked also about the change that is drifting communities away from their traditions, also the way they understand community. All this is changing. We talked about the violence. Here in Mexico, violence is very, very problematic because it is related to drug trafficking, and there is a lack of governance in relation to violence. There is a lot of organized crime, which affects many communities. And so we don't know exactly how this is being lived in other parts of the world, but we do think that these are very much interrelated issues. And what we propose on one part of the world is not going to be enough. We want to hear from you contributions from other parts of the world if you are feeling these challenges as well, and what can be done in relation to them. Kathy, I believe that we're not going to have a lot of time for this dialogue right now, but we do see that there is an appeal for us to work commonly. Chiapas is a reference experience, of course. It is like a reference in terms of experience. But what we need is an interconnection between us all to work together. And in relation to the other question about the Zapatista army, where it comes from, how it came about, if it came from the own organizations, indigenous organizations, if they are similar, if it was inspired by the church or not. Well, there are many comments that we could do in relation to that, but we will mention a few. It doesn't mean that this intervention, of course, exhausts the possibilities of talking about this, of course. But it is important to know that at the beginning, when the Zapatista army appeared and communities, as we have described them, one organization was political and military organization, and the organization of the church does not have the same nature. It is a social organization. So a political military organization, its structure by nature is in a pyramid form. It is vertical. In contrast, community nature is circular and inclusive. So they are two different ways of working, of operating. It's not that one is good and the other one is bad. They're just two different ways and two different ways of reaching specific means and of what is expected. I believe that the emergence of the Zapatista movement was a big impulse, a big drive that it required to call out to the world, to say, look at what there is, look at what is happening, what is going on in communities has its own rhythm, its own strength, its own way of developing that, of course, did not have this until Zapatismo, which also had the virtue of having as a main weapon or as a main instrument an immense capacity for communicating to the world, a new type of discourse, fresh discourse that did not exist until then. So it's not to put them as opposed, but they are not exactly the same in terms of the nature of these organizations, and the concepts that we mentioned, indigenous concepts, were already there because the people that were there were also catechists, because this is an exchange. So it's very important to understand that there was quite a big interrelation, but of course we also have to understand that they are different. Also, we quoted the words of Jorge Santiago on this session. Jorge Santiago was very much participating in the Zapatista army, and he said that what came up from the catechism of the Indigenous Congress was a different type of consciousness among people. And he said that through these things, these previous things, people learned how to organize themselves. They learned organization, and they supported organization in communities, forms of organization that didn't exist before. There was this effect of respecting organization within communities. Of course, they had the agreement before anything from the outside, but the way of taking this into action, people understood their possibilities for organizing to live better, much better, in order to achieve equality and justice. These were their purposes, their objectives. So I think that in that sense, what was this participation of the church, of course, contributed to create awareness, and awareness is, of course, going to dictate different things in different people. Each person takes their consciousness, their awareness, and it and they can see what they will see, and they define what will be done. This is what we have been trying to explore in these past sessions, and now, and also this common dialogue that we are establishing. Thank you very much.
Yes,
There are 2 or 3 people.
There's still one written in English. I read it out. Does topic 8 include community access and well-being to support community power and voices and influence key stakeholders in creating an enabling environment that encourage and respond to the agency of the people and community-led actions? Because change led by community will always be more contextually appropriate and therefore more impactful and sustainable. Thank you.
Bueno, pues es un comentario muy...
Well, that is... the question is actually a very powerful comment. The well-being of the community. Everything in life has a reference. Consciousness for freedom. Consciousness for freedom is consciousness that refers to the Indigenous Congress, that gave it more awareness and gave more depth to the key topics that made up their central life values: education, health, work. These were the fundamental topics of the conference, and the key for it to be powerful was how they gathered the word one by one. 300,000 people, and to join and unite all these voices in a single voice is amazing, because they are well adjusted to the idea of the agreement. When they were having these conversations divided up in groups, the foreign press really couldn't believe their eyes, and the national press thought that this was a type of I don't know, make-believe situation where everything was pre-manufactured. They really didn't think that there were building unity in the voice. The union in humanity has to do with creating a future, the art of creating a future. I agree completely, the art of creating a future, because this is what we are living there.
Dice Zaira que muchísimas gracias.
Zaira is saying, thank you so much for the participation.
Javier and Kathy. Muchas gracias y bueno.